Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the OriginTrail Polkadot Meetup. Sorry for a bit of a technical delay. We are happy to see people here in the room. Also, we are happy to see all you guys on the YouTube following us live. We have a great agenda today. Without going into too many details, I will guide you through what we will be looking at today. So we will kicking off with the Dieter Fishbein, the head of ecosystem development at Web3 Foundations, with a very interesting presentation. Afterwards, being followed by our own Branimir Rakic, the CTO of OriginTrail, with his presentation. Afterwards, we'll follow it up with the Fireside Chat, and we'll finish it off with the Q&A. We invite you all to post your questions in the YouTube chat. We'll be looking at them and we'll be grouping the questions, and we will have a dedicated Q&A for all you guys to get involved. So yeah, thank you all for joining, and hope you join the event. So I would like to invite Dieter first off with his presentation. Multi-chain is here. Latest updates on Kusama and Polkadot Parachain. So welcome, Dieter.
Thanks so much. Hey everybody. Super awesome to be here in Belgrade at, I think, the first in-person meetup I've been at for at least the last year and a half. Really excited to talk about Polkadot and Kusama and the start of Parachain Auctions and crowd loans today. So I think the way this talk is going to go is, first off, I'm going to talk a bit about Polkadot and Kusama. I think probably a lot of you know what it is, but for those of you that don't, I'll be spending some time talking about the subject, and then diving into Parachain Auctions and crowd loans. Here we go. Okay, let's see if this clicker works. There we go. So I'm Dieter Fishbein, head of ecosystem development for Web3 Foundation. For those of you that don't know, Web3 Foundation is the Swiss foundation behind Polkadot, the issuer of DOT. And really, we launched Polkadot in May of last year, and now we're focused on building the ecosystem on top of the protocol. So before diving into crowd loans and parachain auctions, I think it probably makes sense to talk a bit about Polkadot and really what we're trying to accomplish there. So we believe in a multi-chain world. I think you've been seeing this trend towards application-specific chains. The real reason here is that developers really want to tailor their platform to their use case. When you actually think about this, decentralized computation is inherently very expensive. And so a one-size-fits-all platform for developing applications doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think you can get quite a bit done there. But really, when you want to build a easy-to-use, scalable platform with good UI, you're seeing a lot of different teams take the approach that they want their own customized chain. And I think that as we move out in time to the next, over the next 5-10 years, we're going to see probably a small number of blockchains that do one or a few things very well. Probably not like 200 or 300, but probably, I think, 100, 150, maybe dozens that are really strongly used. And this multi-chain future is something that we feel strongly about. And if you believe it, you really need a layer below these chains that holds everything together, that allows them to actually communicate with one another, and gives them things like security, interoperability, and kind of really nice means to actually allow developers to build on them. And this is what Polkadot is. Polkadot is a layer 0 meta protocol that allows independent blockchains to securely and efficiently communicate together. And there's roughly three key properties here that I think are important to talk about. Firstly, we have shared security. So as an independent chain that's connected to Polkadot, developers don't need to worry about building their own community of validators or miners to supply security. They don't have to inflate their token, which can have massive costs. They can simply pay a fee for security and piggyback off the relay chain. This also avoids a massive coordination cost that would normally come with building up this community. Polkadot also takes care of cross-chain communication. So with Polkadot and with all these independent parachains that are connected to it, a developer or a company doesn't actually have to worry about building bridges between different blockchains. They can simply leverage the interoperability of Polkadot to communicate with all the parachains connected to the network. And this, and by the way, by parachains, when I talk about that, I really mean an independent blockchain connected to Polkadot. And so this is not just secure communication as in token transfers, but this is actually like composability of applications built on these different platforms. So an application on one parachain like the OriginTrails parachain can actually interact with an application built on another parachain, which is a really, really powerful and flexible paradigm. Lastly, Polkadot, well, I mean, not really Polkadot, but really the substrate framework, gives reduced development times for developers trying to build their own customized chain. So what this actually looks like is a software development kit that allows developers to actually leverage a lot of pre-built modules of functionality that they probably want. So things like smart contract languages, things like the notion of accounts and balances, and then actually customize their chain as much or as little as they want so that they can really just focus on developing the business logic. And so Polkadot, through Substrate, through interoperability, and through shared security, really offers like this wonderful development platform for a business where you can just focus on building your blockchain in a fraction of the time than it would if you built it from scratch. You can connect it to Polkadot, take advantage of the intimate interoperability and shared security that it provides. This reduces development times, makes it much, much easier for companies to actually focus on their business and what they want to build. So what's the catch? I mean, basically, if you look at this diagram, you can see kind of what Polkadot looks like in a sense. You have the circle, which is this relay chain that connects all these kind of little offshoots here, all these parachains together. With such a powerful system, we can actually only support a finite number of parachains. And we say, when a parachain is connected to Polkadot, we actually say it occupies a parachain slot. And so this begs the question, how do we actually choose the parachains that make it into one of these slots and actually can take advantage of this powerful system? Of course, we don't choose it, but this is the notion of auctions, crowd loans, really a market-based approach for distributing these slots and this power. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. So what the system actually looks like, what the system of auctions looks like, and the crowd loan mechanism that really allows the community to participate in a powerful way. So before jumping into that, I think it's very useful to know what this distribution of slots actually looks like. And so we think that optimistically Polkadot can support about 100 parachains. The way we think about this being divided is that there's going to be about 10 to 30 common good parachains. These are really focused on common good infrastructure, things like bridges, things like generic asset issuance chains that are useful for essentially all the different projects building on the platform. And then the least slots are really what the projects are going to go after to try to occupy. Basically, there's an auction process that allows projects to bid on one of these slots and occupy it for a finite period of time. I won't talk about parathreads. That's a whole other, probably, a conversation. And so how do these auctions work? How do these projects actually bid to acquire these slots? Before getting into that, I think it's important to understand what slot duration actually looks like. The maximum slot length for any of these parachains will be for 2 years. So if I'm a project, I successfully bid on a slot, I can occupy that slot for up to a 2-year period. And this can be subdivided. So a project can actually bid on a slot for just 3 months and kind of in multiples of 3, 6, 9, 12 months essentially. And this is for this is for Polkadot. This is not for Kusama, but on Kusama, basically everything's a bit faster. So it's probably useful to say what Kusama actually is. So we launched Kusama in December 2019, basically because at that point, Polkadot was about 80% built. And we wanted to launch a different network that essentially had the same technology, kind of the same structure as Polkadot, but also had value, but wasn't actually Polkadot, because we wanted to test a bunch of features that really involved crypto-economic consequences that weren't totally figured out yet. And we thought the only way to do that was to launch a value-bearing network in order to test these things. So we did that in 2019, learned a lot of lessons, went on to launch Polkadot in May of last year. And now Kusama lives essentially as a separate, independent, value-bearing, experimental version of Polkadot, where not only do we deploy new upgrades before deploying them to Polkadot, but you're seeing a lot of projects actually deploy to Kusama prior to their Polkadot deployment. This is a really interesting topic, and I'd love to dive in more, but maybe during the question period if people are interested. But in any case, when you think about how Kusama actually functions, it is essentially the same technology of Polkadot, probably a little more advanced, but generally much faster moving. So the slot duration on Kusama is about a year instead of 2 years, just under a year, 48 weeks. And the lease period is 6 weeks. So I mean, again, this means a project can come in. If they acquire a Kusama Parachain slot, they can get it for up to 6 weeks, or sorry, up to 48 weeks and in increments of 6 weeks. This is just a kind of an artist's interpretation of what Parachain onboarding actually looks like on both Kusama and Polkadot. So initially, we'd have the first auction. At the end of the first auction, which is right at this little spot here, the slot will be, or the successful Parachain will be onboarded and then essentially occupy this period here for as long as they do. We have the second auction here and then third auction further down. And so what this means is we don't start with like 10 auctions and then 10 Parachains join. We actually stagger it just to make sure things work as expected. And we have expected behavior throughout. So what I haven't actually talked about is what bidding means and what is the cost of one of these slots for a project. So just taking Polkadot as the example here, if I'm a project, I come in, I want one of these Parachain slots, what I'm actually doing is bidding in DOT in order to acquire one of these slots. And say OriginTrails comes in, they bid 10 DOT to acquire their Parachain slot, and they're the highest bidder throughout the auction period. So they win the slot and they're onboarded. They don't actually lose these DOT. These DOT are locked up for the duration of the slot lease. So if OriginTrails, say, wins a 2-year slot, these DOT will be locked up for their 2 years and then returned to OriginTrail after that. And so it's important to think about that because the notion of cost being the bid size is actually completely wrong. It's simply the opportunity cost of not having access to those DOT for a 2-year period. And then you're guaranteed to get them back. So it's not a spend, it's basically a loan. So I think we've already covered quite a lot of ground, and I apologize for moving so quickly, but we know what Polkadot is, we know what Kusama is, we know what auctions are. Now to talk about crowd loans. I think the obvious question is, how can a project actually come up with the amount of DOT or KSM required to actually finance one of these things. Because sometimes these can be relatively expensive, or at least if you're competing with a capital-rich project and you just have a good idea, then this can be a challenge. And so the whole notion of crowd loans were developed, which basically allows a project to source DOT, or KSM, from the community in order to finance their slot bid. And so I'll explain a bit more of what this means. Basically, what's on the slide is what I said. Crowd loans allow teams to raise DOT to use for bidding in Parachain auctions. So if you're a DOT holder and you see that there's a number of parachains that are really trying to acquire a slot, as long as the parachains have agreed to use the crowd loan module, you as a DOT holder can actually contribute to that. And then you're now financing part of the bid. And so you will actually put these DOT into the crowd loan for a given project, and then you're guaranteed to get them back either at the end of the slot lease that the project wins, or if the project actually doesn't win it at all, you'll still get those back. So this is interesting because it allows a couple of different things. On one hand, Parachain teams can create incentives for crowd loan participants. They can do whatever they want, but one popular method we've seen is that Parachain teams will actually distribute their native token as a reward for crowd loan participants. Again, as a crowd loan participant, your capital is not at risk. You just have kind of the same opportunity cost that a Parachain project would have as well. So the really, really important thing, and I think one of the really innovative things here, is that crowd loans on Polkadot mean you don't have to have big pockets to become a parachain. You just really need the support of the community, you need good ideas, and you need that strong support. Again, this is kind of a slide that summarizes what I said. You're able to support your favorite teams and often get something in return, which is really exciting. And as a Parachain team, this is one option to actually decentralize your token distribution from day one, which is a really, really important thing if you're actually trying to truly create a decentralized network. So these slides were actually created for Polkadot Decoded. I stole them from one of my colleagues, Sean DeBreezy. And so what to expect then should actually be like what is happening now, because earlier this week, Parachain Auctions were announced on Kusama, and we've actually started crowd loan campaigns. Well, we've actually implemented crowd loan features, and a number of projects have started crowd loan campaigns. And so instead of telling you what to expect, I'm actually going to tell you what's happening right now, which I think is a lot more exciting. So on Kusama, we're starting with 5 auctions. Each auction will last a week and be approximately 1 week apart. So we're going to have one auction, it's going to go for a week, it's going to end, winning Parachain is going to get onboarded, followed by another auction, followed by 3 more auctions, all for 5 weeks in total, essentially. The first auction was announced on, I think, Tuesday this week, and it's going to start on June 15th, last till June 22nd, and then the slot duration will be approximately a year. Just a schedule of all the upcoming auctions. And this is where it gets exciting. So there's a number of Kusama crowd loan campaigns currently in progress. I took this screenshot this morning, and then I noticed that there's actually, I think, one or two other projects have already started their crowd loan campaigns. And what you've actually seen is you've seen about 380,000 KSM get locked up in these crowd loan campaigns, which is a very high number. This is about 4% of the total supply of KSM. So this is over about 15,000 individual contributors have participated in these things. They've been open maybe for 3 or 4 days. So there's massive, massive traction from the community already. There's clearly a massive want for the community to actually support their favorite projects. And I'd really encourage all of you to check this out and get involved. Which brings me to the Get Involved page. If you want to actually read more about Parachain Auctions, go to the kusama.network/auctions page. That dashboard I showed you on the previous page is part of the Polkadot.js wallet, and you can find a link to that there. Subscan, which is a great independent team, have also built their own auction dashboard, which I'd encourage you to check out as well. I think we're doing questions later, but questions later, or? Yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you guys. Really, really happy to be here, and thank you for putting on this wonderful meetup.
Dieter. Yeah, that was a very exciting presentation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it, both here, and I see more people coming in. It's really fun to see a crowd. It's been a while. And thank you all for posting questions on YouTube. As Dieter mentioned, we will be covering the questions later on. But yeah, without further ado, I would like to invite our CTO, Branimir Rakic, co-founder and CTO of OriginTrail. Yeah, please, cheers. Yeah. And with his presentation, OriginTrail multi-chain, decentralized knowledge graph, and OriginTrail Parachain. So yeah.
All right, testing 1, 2, 3. Cool. Hey everyone. I have to say first, it's incredible to see everybody here. Like, literally haven't seen so many good, friendly faces in one room in like 2 years. So super excited to share today what we've been doing over the last really year, and excited to be here with Dieter and Polkadot team. So I have actually a lot to say. There's a lot of stuff to be explained around OriginTrail as well, because I believe not everybody is really familiar to where actually OriginTrail has come over the, let's say, the last couple of years in the pandemic. So I will be explaining about OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph and what OriginTrail Parachain is today. So, not sure how much time I have, but I suppose, yeah, you'll give me some signal. So I'll start off with really a total zoom out, like why do we really do this? And why all these fancy blockchains and great super sounding tech? And where do we actually come from as OriginTrail? So if you look at some of the biggest problems that have been happening in the world over the last couple of years, perhaps somebody doesn't even remember, but before the pandemic, we had huge fire issues in South America. And the Amazon has been severely damaged due to all of these fires happening. Now, these fires are not just happening out of random. Something is wrong. And something is wrong on not a kind of a small level. It's not a thing that, is a matter of one city or one company or, something that's just going on in control of some small entities, actually about all of us. And it comes down to supply chains in a way, and how we really take care of this planet and how sustainable it is to actually do things in the manner that we do them today. Apart from that, obviously, everybody's been experiencing all of these issues around the pandemic, but one of the key issues when you think about safety was actually having a lot of counterfeit personal protective equipment show up. And that's obviously, again, a supply chain issue. A lot of people are trying to use the problems or like loopholes that can be exploited in the system because, well, the system is actually inherently decentralized, and in a certain way, it's very hard to control, to monitor, because it's just a very complex thing, and I'll go a little bit more into detail about that soon. But there's been a lot of damage because of this. A lot of people obviously losing lives over this pandemic, but also getting sick. And I won't go there, but I'm sure you all know that we have seen quite a few of these problems come out from actually not having really well-maintained supply chains globally. And really, now going into kind of a different space, but again, with the same problem, I'm not sure how many of you here have seen The Social Dilemma. Can we maybe have a raise of hands? Oh, okay, so about half of people. Well, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's really a kind of a nice documentary explaining what really goes on with your data, or shall I say supply chain of data, when it goes into the social networks. And that means all your photos, all the things you post, and what actually that data is used for, and that it's used for to, in a way, manipulate your behavior to actually purchase more products, or get more of your attention, or get you hooked into mindlessly scrolling and doing all of these things. Well, this is really it's a very big problem, but it's kind of in a way a data supply chain problem. Who gets to see and govern the data that we produce and that we will be producing more and more. So in a way, all of these three might seem kind of separate, but it's really about managing a large global scale of the movement of things, be they digital or physical, and then cause some problem that can be within the supply chain or kind of an externality, like a fire that doesn't just happen for no reason. We messed up somewhere, but we probably don't exactly know what to fix because we don't know all of this information. So the point there being is we as an organization are actually there to help facilitate bringing supply chains toward the more sustainable future. And we believe that's only possible by introducing systems that help people and organizations exchange in a trusted way and exchange knowledge in particular. And I'll explain a little bit more what that really means. But this is really the purpose of us as a team. And by the way, we are Team TraceLabs, core developers of OriginTrail. And we've been working on this actually since 2011, actually. It says 2013 on this slide. But 2011, the three of us co-founders met as students, and we started doing the first project together. And we built a very rudimentary system for, at the time, showing consumers where their organic beef comes from. So you could go into a store, you could scan a code on a piece of beef, and because this was organic European grown beef, you could actually see where it comes from. That was kind of a simple thing. But in 2013, actually, the idea got a lot of traction. We opened up the company, and OriginTrail as a project was born. Very quickly, it gained support by organizations such as the Walmart Food Safety Collaboration Center, some European initiatives, and one of the most notable, actually the most notable supply chain standardization organization called GS1. From 2018, we actually realized that in order to scale the solutions from these small deployments within, let's say, shorter supply chains, and to actually extend the usage of the technology, we actually went ahead and took a decentralized approach. And the reasons really being, I'll explain in the next slides, really being the ability to actually tailor to the problem itself. So not to create another situation where us as an organization were the one in control of everything, both the data and the system, but rather enabling everybody to share. And that's how OriginTrail open source blockchain agnostic protocol was born. Very soon in 2018 we launched the mainnet, and it has been in use in production by several major enterprises in the Fortune 500 list. One of the most notable ones is the British Standards Institution, but also many companies in supply chain such as Walmart and Target using their systems which operate on top of OriginTrail, as well as the Next Generation Internet Initiative, which is a European-wide initiative for bringing a more decentralized and user-governed internet, partners like Oracle. And then finally, at the end of last year, we actually joined the Substrate Builders program as part of the Polkadot community. So from 2021, as you can see, we're building a multi-chain vision of OriginTrail where Polkadot is a big part of it, and I'll explain today how. But really quickly, I want to explain the problem in a little more detail. So you can see a very simple supply chain here. So this is kind of a simplified drawing of, very linear, very simple thing, but essentially kind of an easy way to illustrate the problem. Each of these companies in the supply chain has some sort of data tracking system. Some of them actually use paper. Some of them use old school Excel. But actually some of them have some really awesome systems. All of them, whatever they have, the systems have been built to tackle the problems of this one organization. So everybody's sort of paying attention to what's interesting for them. And essentially nobody has the visibility in the whole thing. So nobody knows, nobody can tell you at the end of the supply chain, I don't know, this object was here, here, and there, and this happened, and this was inspected. Like nobody has basically all this data in one place. And it comes down to really supply chain data integration. So you cannot easily integrate this data. There's just not this magical place where you can go and check and see, not just like from a perspective of what you wanting to know where the piece of beef you bought comes from, but really from all kinds of things. Like for example, one of our clients is the Swiss railway company, and they actually track all kinds of parts and events that happen in their supply chain, events like welding rail tracks and trail tracks. That sounds interesting. And basically, they do this for safety reasons, not for oh, I have this cool organic product from whatever, but it's more about making sure that these tracks actually don't separate and the train doesn't go off. And a big part of it is actually figuring out what's going on and tracking all this in real time. So since this is the problem, we can actually separate it in 3 different parts. And the first part is interoperability. So every company in that chain stores data, like I said, in some way, so all this information in some way that's suitable for them. So if I'm like a warehousing company, I'm gonna organize my own data the way I see fit in my own system. So in terms of like exchanging this information, a shared data model is definitely needed, some sort of a standard, and that's where interoperability gets achieved. Interconnectivity is another problem, like how do you actually get all these systems connected? And then finally, integrity. What if you get some piece of information from some system? Does that information actually have any integrity? Is it valid? Can you trust it? Can you determine the degree of trust you should have in it? So these 3 problems is actually what OriginTrail tackles. And what OriginTrail does is really, it creates this global decentralized knowledge graph, or what we like to call the Google for supply chains. And essentially, if you look at these 5 different supply chain participants, you'll actually see that we envision kind of a neutral public knowledge graph in between them, which is supported by blockchain, and which is actually a public good. And then an extension of this to multiple private instances of local knowledge graphs. Now, what does this mean and what is really a knowledge graph? I just want to give you a very quick intro. So a knowledge graph is a really novel data structure where connections are as important as the data itself. So the idea there being that if you know that a certain thing has happened at a certain location, you can connect these 2. And this connection is really a first-class citizen of this knowledge graph, and therefore you can actually traverse the graph. So if you're like familiar with graph systems or any sort of graph algorithms, there's really cool ways to actually do things with it. It's also very extendable. You don't have a rigid data structure that you cannot extend or add something to. It's very easy to have a couple of things that you can connect together. You can facilitate this connection with cryptography, and you can also apply various different data models in the same graph, which achieves interoperability. So for example, the way OriginTrail knowledge graph works today, it supports GS1 data models for supply chain data tracking, but also supports W3C data models for IoT data, for example, which is one of the ones is called Web of Things. And however, the other thing is that not all data gets to be public. As you can see in the private knowledge graphs, a lot of this data remains in control of single organizations, or be that at the end of the supply chain, maybe a consumer, maybe it's us who have a mobile phone and have a system that has a graph representation of what it is that we've been actually doing, either in a social network or maybe in a store. So the point there being is that this global knowledge graph actually allows to find, like with Google, to search for a particular piece of data, maybe a barcode on a product, but also could be an NFT, could be anything that has an identifier, or really anything you can query. Kind of like in Google, you can go and type in like, who is Branimir Rakic or whatever. You can type that like, what happened with this beer, or where does this car part come from? And then you can get all of the information from all of these guys in the chain, and you can verify that it indeed comes from them, that it hasn't been changed, and it somehow fits. And it fits actually in a graph that they're saying the things that connect, that make sense. If they do not connect, then it's a signal to look into, definitely. What's really useful here is, I'm going to have to say a couple of words about it, is the blockchain layer. The blockchain is actually used for three things, and things that make sense. I believe a lot of supply chain projects try to use blockchain for too much, which is quite often to put a lot of data on the chain. As Dieter already mentioned, that it's actually multi-party computation is very expensive, and it's not really the use case for it. Like, to put it simply, blockchain is not designed to be used as a database, a traditional database, so to handle like gigabytes of data of every single company. If you were to exchange larger data sets in such a way, a couple of problems that you have. First of all, everything has to be public on a public chain. Then you have to employ some additional things like encryption or zero-knowledge proofs to somehow reference to something outside of chain, but essentially you're still going to put a lot of stuff, a lot of burden on the chain, and that costs money. It also is not the best data structure for it. However, what you could use the chain for, and what OriginTrail does, is uses it for three things. So one is decentralized identity management. So if you're having a decentralized system, it doesn't make sense to have a centralized identity broker. So something like, for example, Facebook, you're not going to use this by logging in with Facebook, because then again, we defeat the point, right? So the idea here is actually that W3C created a really cool standard called the decentralized identities, basically based on cryptographic wallets on any blockchain. So it spans multiple blockchains, and you can use it in an interoperable way. The second one is verifiable credentials. So the idea that each of these parties in the system can claim something, and you can verify that. So if you get some sort of some information, you can actually be sure that it comes from the primary producer. And then finally, tokenization and incentivization. So how do you take all of this off-chain data and somehow tokenize it and create products out of them? I'll be speaking a little bit more about that, but I'm going to be moving a little quicker. So basically, OriginTrail is pretty versatile. It's been implemented, like I said, by BSI and assurance and compliance industry, supply chain transparency by SBB, which is the Swiss Railways. There's been personal data management projects like the OpenPKG developed together with the Next Generation Internet Initiative, several other projects that I encourage everybody to go look into on our website. But essentially, it's a very base layer technology, and the idea of it is that it can be utilized in many data and knowledge sharing scenarios. This is one example, like very similar to the one I spoke about. It's actually from Slovenia. You can actually go in a store. Even if you're from Serbia, you can go and scan some of these products, and you will actually see exactly where the poultry, the chicken meat, comes from through an interface which basically helps you navigate and get to this data on the decentralized knowledge graph. This is another example which is a little more cooler even. It's about whiskey, and actually whiskey that is being tracked from literally the farm. As you can see here, pictures of one of our partners from Monasterevan Distillery positioning an IoT camera on their fields. So they're literally monitoring the grain from the way it grows and gets harvested all the way to literally your glass in the end, through the whole process, maturing whiskey, having it made, distilled, transported, and you can do that through a very simple interface, reading all of this data from the decentralized knowledge graph and being able to verify it using blockchain verifiable credentials and decentralized identity. Another one is the SCAN Association. This is a really big project. I'll really briefly say about it. It's 55 members, which are retailers, mostly larger US importers. They have basically a system where they share information coming from supply chain auditors. So they go and check that something is all right or not all right in a Chinese factory, and they would actually share all of this information between a lot of these companies. Among them are Home Depot, Target, Walmart, and actually all of this data underneath comes from the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph. So what they actually do is they would read all of this information and imagine that this is Trace Labs being audited, and they can actually verify all of the data that's being read. So the audit issuer, the audit integrity, and the revocation status. So basically, for those of you familiar with verifiable credentials, this is another way of data sharing through the OriginTrail decentralized knowledge graph. A couple of leading organizations really supporting OriginTrail across all of this time. Just a few interesting tweets. coming from World Economic Forum, BSI, Walmart, Oracle also is one of our bigger partners in the enterprise space. Now, what is it with DKG, the Decentralized Knowledge Graph, and Polkadot? Well, basically, the integration is coming around the corner. And there's kind of a very short timeline that we actually have done this, but it's incredible how much has been done. So Parity, actually the company behind Polkadot, has joined Trace Alliance as one of the organizations within the OriginTrail ecosystem very recently, and then very soon, us as Trace Labs, we joined the Substrates Builders program. That actually kicked off an initiative called Starfleet to launch an OriginTrail dedicated blockchain based on Substrate, the framework Dieter has introduced. Very soon we launched an alpha testnet, connected it to the OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph, which actually then operates with 3 blockchains, Ethereum, XDAI, and Polkadot, or actually Starfleet at the time. Very quickly we also went to beta, fast-tracked that integration to go into Q3 with Polkadot, and basically the idea is to have all of these functionalities of the Decentralized Knowledge Graph be available for the entire Polkadot community. Now there's actually a cool thing I want to announce today. We have made the biggest move in terms of the integration with Polkadot, and that is that OriginTrail Parachain has become an integrated parachain into Rococo. So if you go to the block explorer that Dieter has been showing from today, from a couple of hours ago, you will actually see the OriginTrail blockchain there, and the parachain is actually operating for about a day or so integrated, and it's basically one of the last milestones in between OriginTrail parachain being its own chain and actually going towards full integration. So what can we expect from the OriginTrail parachain launch? So we can expect the parachain to be tailored to the Decentralized Knowledge Graph. It will be available for all parachains connected to Polkadot, and that will actually extend the utility of the trace tokens. So I'll briefly go into all of these 3. So the parachain being tailored for DKG, what does that really mean? Well, basically, apart from it being a dedicated blockchain, it's actually going to be optimized for the Decentralized Knowledge Graph. So the functionalities that the graph requires from blockchain are going to be really tailored for best performance. And from that on, it's actually going to be a launch pad to launch the knowledge exchange tools that we have actually announced ending last year. I invite everybody to look it up, but it's basically a set of new tools that enable anybody to tokenize knowledge and data using tools like knowledge tokens, knowledge marketplaces, knowledge tenders, and knowledge wallets. Basically, the idea to facilitate the exchange of data for tokens. And either in a marketplace context or even like a crowd, not crowd loan, but really crowdsourcing data in a tender way. The OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph being on all parachains means basically all parachains get seamless access to OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph features. And that means OriginTrail Decentralized Knowledge Graph being as a semantic decentralized repository, so having all of this off-chain verifiable data usable. Semantic oracle for smart contracts. We'll be speaking more about this when we share a framework on exactly how this can be used with smart contracts on all of the existing blockchains. And also as a data discovery tool, because it actually is in a way like Google. You're able to query systems that are outside of your ecosystem. So perhaps query data on blockchains that is already available, or query data from some legacy system, from IPFS, you name it. Basically, the idea there being that whoever includes a certain data source into the Decentralized Knowledge Graph, all of that will be available through the querying. And obviously, the knowledge exchange tools that I mentioned. And then finally, this extends the utility of Trace. So basically, Trace becomes the native token. Trace is the OriginTrail native token, and basically, in this way, you don't have to use another token, like on Ethereum, for example. That significantly improves usability, and actually the community has already staked 100 million Trace tokens to launch the OriginTrail parachain, which shows quite a good support. So thanks everyone for participating. And now I want to show you the timeline, what's going to happen over the next couple of months. So basically what you see here is really the quarter that is finishing, and the next one Like I said, in May and June, we've done a lot of beta testing and the Rococo integration. Today, we're going to be launching a dedicated OriginTrail testnet for staging deployment, so something that is more long-term than Rococo very soon. And then immediately after that, integrate OriginTrail Warp testnet. By the end of the month, we will also be announcing the crowd loan details, so what we intend to go with and how to implement all of this when it comes to really auction timing, reward structure, how is that going to work. So for those of you who are interested in participating in the OriginTrail crowd loan, you will very soon know exactly what it brings. And then at the beginning of the next quarter, so in a couple of weeks, we're probably even sooner, we're going to start with stress testing and penetration testing, really finishing all of the stuff that needs to be done for us to be production ready. And once the crowd loan phase is complete and we win the Parachain, we will launch the OriginTrail Parachain and integrate it into the decentralized knowledge graph. Super happy for that, because that will basically mean that the OriginTrail will be available for all of these projects on Polkadot, and we are very excited to see what further integrations are coming. Now, today, we actually launched this website, Parachain OriginTrail.io, for anybody who's interested to see more about what's going on with the OriginTrail Parachain. Head over there. You'll see this timeline that I introduced, and just you can learn a little bit more and subscribe for updates. That's it for me. I guess it's enough for this intro. Thanks for the attention, folks.
Thank you, Branimir. Yeah, thank you for this. Thank you for this amazing overview. It was very, very, very well and explained, and also really exciting news about what's coming ahead. So now we will be starting. We'll do a fireside chat with Dieter and Branimir together. So during this time, while they're talking, you can still post questions on YouTube, and after the session, we'll gonna read through and then answer. So yeah, maybe just a brief pause, and then we are come back. Thank you.
I feel good.
Feel good to start? All right.
Sounds good.
Oh, we can see each other.
Awesome.
Maybe I can move this ball. Cool. Okay, so welcome, Dieter. It's great to have you, man.
Great to be here, Brana. Thanks so much for organizing this meetup and having me. It's been
Thanks for coming.
Definitely an excellent time. So I was wondering, you talked about quite a bit about why the parachain structure made sense for you, kind of the customizability you get from that. But what are some of the projects you're interested in working with in the Polkadot ecosystem? And how do you think about that? Yeah.
So maybe it will sound funny, but all of them, basically. So in a way, that's what really Polkadot is all about. So you get all of this interoperability out of the box. And the idea there being that you can have all the cross-chain transactions you want. So what we see it as is really a playing field that is completely open for OriginTrail to be available to all of these projects and vice versa. So all of the features that fit somehow, and because it's such a base layer technology, a lot of it fits. We can see things like deployments on Moonbeam being directly integrated. Things like I mentioned, verifiable credentials, which the Kilt protocol is working on. So all of these great teams seem to be doing a lot of things that can really fit nicely into the technology, and I don't see any reason why not, because it's one of the great things about Polkadot is having all of this forward thinking and vision of really having the interoperable framework for transactions across different chains. So yeah, I would say like all of it is game, and totally we're totally excited to actually get into this world.
Awesome. Do you see like a lot of demand for the services that the OriginTrail parachain provides, like coming from other parachains or other applications in the Polkadot ecosystem? Or how do you think about that aspect? Or is it too early to say? Because like
that's a very good question. Like there's going to be a couple of things that we're publishing in literally the next couple of weeks, which are really frameworks for how to use the decentralized knowledge graph within existing really Polkadot, but also generally blockchain ecosystem. Like for example, a framework for NFTs, where all of this enables any single digital twin or object, semantic object in the decentralized knowledge graph to be tokenized with an NFT. In a way, it is from the get-go. So in that sense, the demand from having the technology available, but also from having these tools built out, is gonna grow tremendously, and we expect actually a lot of it to be something that you just pick up and use, and instead of building out the whole infrastructure again, pretty much like the relay chain. We're not all building relay chains, right? So in that sense, we've been having a lot of great talks with projects from the ecosystem. And it seems that there's a lot of overlap in what they could use the OriginTrail protocol for. So I'm very excited to see it. I'm looking forward to having the Parachain launched.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's a lot of teams on Polkadot building like NFT marketplaces and then building different NFT frameworks. So I could see you actually like satisfying both sides of the equation there. You can get like these actual marketplaces where supplying liquidity could actually make sense and help to achieve, settle some of the demand side of things. But then you could actually define these NFTs in terms of existing frameworks and just leverage that, which is a really nice thing.
Definitely. And I mean, I'm actually very excited to hear what you think about like the upcoming Kusama auctions and how do you see that play out, and really what should we expect as a difference from Kusama to Polkadot when they start? Like how do you see that happening?
It's a good question, and I think before diving into it, something which I really glazed over in my talk was the difference between Kusama and Polkadot, and like what these things are supposed to be, how they complement each other. I spoke a bit about how Kusama was launched, our purpose for launching Kusama at the time. And when you actually think about what Kusama is, it's essentially a less robust, less secure version of Polkadot. It's less robust because we are putting new technology on Kusama much faster and with less testing than putting it on Polkadot. So things break more often. It's less secure because of essentially lower economic security. And so when you think about that, it's also a bit more advanced because new features are added to Kusama before they're added to Polkadot. And so when you think about that, this is basically like a faster moving, more experimental version, kind of more advanced version of Polkadot. So this begs the question, like, where does the demand for this actually come from? This is roughly 3 different places. I think one, a lot of parachain teams actually want to use Kusama like the Web3 Foundation has used Kusama to basically have a earlier, more experimental version of their parachain deployed to Kusama where they can test product, they can test tech before deploying it to Polkadot, which is kind of the slower moving, more robust kind of bank-like security type platform. Now, there's some projects out there where they're saying like, wait a second, us deploying to Polkadot actually is probably going to be too expensive. So let's just deploy to Kusama. This gives us basically what we need. We have the same tech, but we're also leveraging this fantastic community, and there's going to be a bridge to Polkadot anyway, so it's not like we're giving up that community. So we see it being used kind of as a network for basically earlier stage teams that don't have kind of the same level of development of some of these more enterprise grade teams going to Polkadot, while at the same time for dual deployments of teams that really want to test out what they're doing in a much more complete way than simply just through a Polkadot deployment.
Oh, that sounds really like a good explanation. And do you feel like, so maybe can you tell us, since we already explained that, like what the differences in the auctions will be? So there's some tiny differences and stuff like that. And while you do that, I'm sure you're thirsty. I'll bring you some water.
So, as I said, like Kusama is essentially faster moving. And so what that means from an auction perspective is auctions on Kusama last 1 week, auctions on Polkadot last 2 weeks. And basically, this is the key difference. It's just a shorter auction period, the shorter parachain lease times. Thanks a lot, Brenna.
You're welcome.
And everything just moves a bit faster is really the way to think about it. So we expect to have auctions on Kusama through mid-July. And then basically, maybe even before these auctions end, we'll also start auctions on Polkadot, or at least announce the start of auctions on Polkadot. But these will move slower, take longer, and just generally will target more stability there.
Yeah, and one of the things that I understood was one of the most important things for holders was to know that they have a certain period where they have time to unstake their tokens, right? So for Polkadot, it's 28 days, if I'm not mistaken, and for Kusama is a week or something like that.
Yeah, so it's important to actually look at the specifics of how staking works on each network here. So if you go and stake some DOT, to unstake it, you have to actually wait 28 days before you can transfer it. This has ramifications for if you want to start parachain auctions on Polkadot, you want to make sure the community has time to unstake their DOT between the time you first announce the first auction and when the first auction actually takes place. So when we actually announce Polkadot auctions, there's likely going to be a 28-day period from the date of the announcement, at least a 28-day period, to the first date of the actual auction, so that the community can unstake their DOT and they have time basically to prepare for that auction. Now, when we announced the first date of Kusama auctions being June 15th, we announced that on June 8th, essentially, so the community had 7 days to unbond their KSM, because the unbonding period on Kusama is 7 days and not 28. Does that mostly answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. I was. It gives a complete picture of the whole process, and I guess it's a good time to be said here. Awesome. And then you actually come from the Web3 Foundation. So the idea is to, like you already mentioned, you asked us about what projects are we looking to work with. How do you guys help and facilitate this ecosystem grow and have these projects interoperate in a way?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, the purpose of the foundation now, because Polkadot is launched and because we went through that process, is really to make sure that this ecosystem of projects is built on top of the network. So we work super closely with Parity Technologies, which is the development studio basically behind building Polkadot, building the core protocol and things like that, to help coordinate the community of projects building on top of the network, making sure that they have access to resources, to actually educate them on what we're doing, and making sure they know about what other projects are doing that could complement their own project. I mean, Brana, you mentioned that OriginTrail was in the Substrate Builders program. This is one of those programs which you can think of as being like an evergreen accelerator. Like, do you think that's a fair description of it?
Yeah, it is, because it's our experience is actually really, really good. Like, in a way, we were super excited to start working with Parity because I don't know who said it first, but it was a really great metaphor. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the European football teams, but somebody said Parity is like the Barcelona of blockchain development or something, like Real Madrid, I'm not sure. Anyhow, it really is so. Like, I mean, the experience that the team has with really building Ethereum prior to that, with all the clients, actually Parity client, and then I believe it was the most performing client. I'm not sure, but in terms of like, you know,
having Ethereum was used
exactly
quite a lot.
Currently it's Open Ethereum. That's the name of it. But basically, Having all of that distilled in a framework like Substrate is not only great because you've literally built on top of the knowledge that was like obtained over the
On the knowledge
years.
graph.
On knowledge graph, exactly. Well, it's funny you should say it because the Substrate framework is something that is really perfectly blending into the idea of the knowledge graph, because it's really a bunch of tools to help you do something with all of this verifiable knowledge. And what's really great, what we see as the way forward, is having this modularity of Substrate enabling you to build palettes and components where you can actually directly, even more directly integrate with the graph. So in that sense, having all of this knowledge available and searchable, for example, through smart contracts or through the off-chain module is something that we are super excited about. But just we have to take care of this first step, which is to launch the Parachain and get all of the stuff going.
And I'm curious about one thing. You mentioned you guys were built on Ethereum, and you also had a XDAI sidechain as well. Mm-hmm. How does the Parachain, in addition to these deployments, what does that actually look like, and where are you going with that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So basically, OriginTrail started in 2018 with Ethereum, and but from the get-go, the idea was to build a system that is multi-chain. So if you go and read the OriginTrail original white paper from 2017, it says that OriginTrail is a blockchain agnostic protocol, and one of the main principles behind it is neutrality. So the idea was not to get stuck on one blockchain or one type of implementation or type of blockchain. And we've been experimenting with actually quite a few things. We've actually done some implementations with Hyperledger Fabric, which work in a bit of a different way, so because it's not the same type of a system. But essentially, what Ethereum and then the extension to XDAI, which happened at the beginning of this year, where we actually truly built OriginTrail to support multiple chains, it enabled people a choice, and that's what we mean with neutrality. Now, the third choice coming is really the OriginTrail Parachain, which we intend to optimize with all of the learnings. Kind of like Parity learned a lot from Ethereum, we're going to, also learn a lot from these Ethereum implementations and go and customize the chain so that it's more performant, scalable. It gets all of these great properties from Substrate and Polkadot, and essentially is the launchpad for the knowledge tools that we're going to be launching. Now, do these knowledge tools specifically should not stay only on this chain, but we see them as being the most usable, most performant there. So in that sense, it's a really kind of a match made in heaven, because Substrate is the most advanced technology for building blockchains, and OriginTrail is really the most advanced knowledge graph in that sense, because it combines both blockchain and knowledge graph technology, which is it's like really a territory for itself. And the merge of these two really enables a lot of different things. So with the existing blockchain implementations, there's a lot of things you can do, but when we go towards a parachain, the opportunity space just expands greatly. There's a lot of things that we can do, and we will do very soon and show. But sometimes I'm afraid to speak a lot about all of these technical things, because you can bore people to death. The best thing is when we have something we can show, and that's going to be soon. So looking forward to showing it too. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah, that'll be great. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, so am I, man. Okay, so it's a cool chat, but maybe we should consult some people from YouTube, or is it a good time to start with questions? What do you guys think?
Yeah, it is a good time. We have some.
We also have people here. We can have questions from here. We don't need to, or
We can do both.
we can. Yeah. Does anybody have a question in the audience here? Maybe. Everybody's shy. It's a new first meetup in.
There's one.
Yeah, bravo.
Hi. Maybe it's a stupid question because I'm not into the blockchain, but I want to know the purpose of the temporary slots that you mentioned. So what's the benefit to have something like that for a limited time, and what happens after that when it expires?
That's a fantastic question. So essentially the idea is that when a project wins a slot, whether this is on Polkadot or Kusama, the reason why you have it for a finite amount of time is basically, so after that happens, you want either the community or that there's basically another auction process, right? So this auction process repeats, and the idea behind these auction processes is that you always want kind of the best technology and the best, not even the best technology, but the best product to actually have access to these slots, because they provide quite a lot of resources, basically, and quite a lot of power. So it makes sense to do this periodically to make sure that consistently, like, the best products and the best businesses occupy these slots. If you didn't, if it was more like you buy this forever, then 5 years from now, you may not actually have what the community wants or what makes most sense, basically, for users building in one of these slots. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand that. That's from your point of view, but
Yeah.
from the business that wants to become
Yeah.
a parachain, what's the benefit for them?
Yeah. So the thing, I mean, there is a lot of power in these slots, but if say at the end a business loses a slot, they can downgrade to something like a parathread, which is essentially a pay-as-you-go parachain. It's like, instead of paying all this money to get basically a certain amount of guaranteed transaction throughput, they can pay a very small deposit and pay transaction by transaction. So it's not like they lose their business if they don't get to renew a slot. It just becomes kind of a different payment model, if that makes sense. Like, the benefit to the business is that they can kind of build this platform and they don't have to worry about gas fees, essentially, like transaction by transaction fees, if they occupy a slot. But there can't be unlimited number of these. So at some point, you have to offer an alternative that's less powerful, but at the same time gives them still, some degree of comfort. Yeah.
Actually, there's a kind of a connected question to this, which I believe from YouTube, from Thomas O. It says, what is the difference between a Kusama and Polkadot slot? Do you have to bid twice, one for Kusama and one for Polkadot? And do you need, as a project, both, or is one slot enough? So I guess it's a good thing to explain.
No, it's a great question, and this comes back a bit to what I spoke about earlier, like the difference between Polkadot and Kusama and how people use them. So I think you're going to see some projects just bid on Kusama if they don't need kind of the robustness and security that Polkadot provides. You're going to see some projects just go on Polkadot if they really want that gold standard security and robustness. Obviously, on Polkadot, you can have a slot for longer because it's meant to be a more stable network. On Kusama, this is a shorter period of time just because it's meant to be a network for experimentation, basically for less developed businesses. So we expect those to kind of move faster throughout the process. And maybe, if you go on Kusama and you build your community of users, maybe you become less capital constrained, you test out a product that actually you want to make available to a wider audience, Polkadot can present a potential upgrade path. All this to say, you don't need to build on both. You can. Now, you can just choose one that's kind of more suitable for your needs. And for projects that really want like a really high degree of robustness and security, it makes sense to have both deployments because they can actually test what they're building on Kusama, which is a real-world environment with real economic consequences, before deploying to Polkadot. So this is kind of like the ultimate gold standard in security, testing, and robustness, to have both deployments. And this is actually what you're seeing now. You're seeing like a lot of projects that actually are going for Kusama crowd loans. They intend, or at least publicly have stated, that they intend to have both deployments. But I think over time, this changes, and I think over time you're going to see different communities develop on each network.
And that's actually, I have a question on that. What do you think in terms of over time? So I know we haven't seen any auction happen yet, and it's totally new, and we should expect chaos. I totally understand that. What do you feel like in terms of sustainability? Like for a certain project, like we already had a question. How do you see projects like in the future, in the upcoming crowd loans and Parachain auctions after the first one? Like, what do you see happening there on the sustainability front?
It's interesting because that's a bit of an unanswered question because we're just not there yet. But there's some really interesting and kind of revolutionary ideas for how this could be done. So I think initially a lot of these projects want to do crowd loans because, one, I mean, it's less capital intensive for them when the community actually contributes to the DOT bond or the KSM bond. But it's also like a really powerful community builder to do something like this. Now for the second auction, so if a project wins an initial Parachain slot, you know, they say they have it for 2 years on Polkadot, and then they go to renew that slot lease, maybe at that point it doesn't make as much sense for them to actually do a crowd loan because they have their community, the project has advanced to some degree, and you know, if they've actually achieved a certain amount of product market fit and really developed their community, maybe they have now the resources to actually accumulate some of the DOT themselves required to renew the slot lease. I won't go into the details of what this actually looks like, but basically there's a concept of on-chain decentralized sovereign wealth funds that encourage the accumulation of DOT by projects to act so they can actually pay for subsequent slot leases. Akala has talked about this quite a lot. I think it's super interesting. And you know, after kind of this initial crowd loan bootstrap phase, I think we'll see some of the really constant Parachain projects try to support renewed slots from their own account. But we'll see what that actually looks like.
Yeah, I totally agree on that because I believe in the long term it has to be somehow driven by adoption.
Yeah.
So if your chain or Parachain is not really used by anybody, then obviously some sort of problem with market fit is there.
And then if that happens, someone can come in with a new product, do a crowd loan, and hopefully bootstrap a better product.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So the way we see it from the perspective of OriginTrail is that because the technology is being more and more adopted, there's definitely, with the usage, there comes the capacity to have a sustainable parachain on Kusama or Polkadot in very long term. So that is, it's really been the key driver. OriginTrail hasn't been a technology that has been too much in the news, if you were to say. It's been, we've been building behind the scenes with all these enterprises, and sometimes it's painful. Like, you know, you need to go through all of these checks and hoops and all of these rings of fire to, you know, get all of the things tested. But once you do, you actually, you know, things start going really, really well and growing. So from that perspective, we actually have a really good feel, because the way the Parachain is going to unlock this and is going to make things more scalable, cheaper, and efficient, we're absolutely sure that once we get on Polkadot, we're going to stay there. So yeah, cool. Great ideas. By the way, we have 5 more minutes, right? Something like that. So okay.
Are there any questions on there for you?
There's a bunch of questions. Let me try and, yeah, for example, okay, so for example, this one. So if Trace has to do a crowd loan, so that OriginTrail has to do a crowd loan, does that mean we aren't a common good chain? So I think you explained that through your presentation. A common good chain is...
I can maybe explain it again. So basically, the idea of a common good chain is it should really not be a business. So there shouldn't be projects out there that are really kind of going for common good chains to develop their business. These should be pieces of common good infrastructure. So like decentralized bridging, that have no kind of frictioned token model, basically, that can really just be used by all the different projects on Polkadot in a really equitable and fair way, where there's no rent-seeking behavior. So we don't expect that there's going to be like famous common good chains or common good chains with like large communities, because that's not really the idea there. These are basically public goods. Does that make sense, Bruno?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. So in short, it's not a common good chain. OriginTrail is going to be a explanation. Yeah, I mean it's totally needed, and I'm sure that people are looking into that. I'm looking at there's quite a lot of questions, trying to prioritize here somehow, and basically. There's questions related to OriginTrail that I think would be really good to answer. For example, there's one, it says, does any of this DOT time frame slot boundaries impact Trace data holding job contracts? For example, if someone wins a 3 or 4 year job, is their impact on the customer? This is a very good question, and the shortest answer is that it comes down to the implementation. So for those of you who don't know, data holding jobs on the OriginTrail network have a expiry date. So that means the nodes that host the data in the public knowledge graph don't host them forever. It doesn't stay there for like, a million years or the length of the lifetime of that blockchain, rather for a certain amount of time, 6 months, 2 years, and it depends on the implementation. So it's going to be interesting to see how these interplay, but the idea there is that there should not be a limitation of that sort, so it should not really impact the functionality of the network. Another one says, does this mean OriginTrail have to keep bidding every 2 years? Well, essentially, yes, 2 years is an arbitrary number, but essentially the slot that we will announce in terms of how long, what the first initial bid will be, after it expires, there will be some sort of an initial new bid.
It's like renewing your lease for office space.
Yeah, basically, you need to, if you rent an office for 12 months and then you need to rent it again, you need to pay, right? All right, we have some more time, or? Okay, one more question. One more question. Let's see, which is maybe one for you. Let's see what's cool.
It's not fair. You have control of the question.
Okay.
Can't ask you the hard. No,
okay. The hardest one. Basically, it's they're all pretty long. So let's try. What is a good one? Okay, so the question here is, when is the first Polkadot auction scheduled to be tentatively?
That's a good question. It's not scheduled yet. So the first Kusama auction, as I said during my presentation, is June 15th. And then the way we do things generally in terms of Polkadot development is that we very rarely commit to dates. And this is, obviously.
So it's a hard question.
It's a hard question. Obviously, you have to commit to dates for auctions that are scheduled, but we need to see how these go, at least have some of them go, before actually announcing auctions on Polkadot. So I think the very kind of basic minimum we need to see is the first auction goes well, a parachain is onboarded, and this parachain actually functions. We may wait a bit longer than that, and then once we're comfortable that parachain auctions and parachains themselves are functioning well on Kusama, that's when we're going to announce the first auction on Polkadot. It's going to be about a month from the first auction, about 28 days from the first auction announcement to when that takes place. I think probably earliest possible is end of July, roughly.
Okay.
Could be later.
Okay, but that was, the question was to be tentative, so that makes sense. Cool. All right, I think we've been speaking for a long time. Maybe any last questions from the audience here? No questions? All right, so that concludes the Fireside Chat, and we can actually go for drinks after a meetup, which is like, wow.
It's a novel
awesome
thing.
Thanks, man. This was great. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
And yeah, I'll leave it to you, Jare, to finish off. Maybe you can sing something.
Yeah. Next time I'll be singing. I promise. Thank you everyone for joining the event. Thank you for these amazing presentations to both Dieter and Branimir. And thank you all for watching live on YouTube and for posting the questions. Without further ado, let's go and have some drinks and hang out in person. That's amazing. Yeah.
I have sound. Yeah. So just one last note. So there will be a couple of other opportunities to post your questions as well. So we will be having the monthly office hours of the OriginTrail team, the TraceLabs team. So that's, for those of you who don't know, that's happening monthly. Feel free to join us. You can post questions before that and really just reach out to us on Twitter, share, like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for everybody who came here. It was exciting, and let's go and get some drinks.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.